Did I just jump over?
Sorry,
Oh, so you used to be charming. Sorry, I missed that.
At the height of her acclaim, Robin Wright quietly carried 6 grudges, each born from betrayal, ambition, and the cost of control in Hollywood's harshest spotlight. It happened in silence. One word in an interview. One pause too long. And suddenly, the world realized Robin Wright wasn't finished keeping score. The journalist had asked an innocent question, something about former co-stars she'd learned the most from. Robin smiled that famously calm, unreadable smile. But then she leaned forward. "Some," she said, "taught me how not to behave." The room went still. She didn't name them then, but she didn't need to. Because behind the grace and restraint, there was history. Stories whispered across sets, deals soured in private meetings, and rivalries that had simmered for decades. Now, at 59, Wright finally admits who hurt her the most and why she never said their names until now. But to understand that list, we have to go back to where it began, to the girl who never wanted Hollywood, but became one of its fiercest survivors, and to the moment when the industry that built her turned on her. Robin Gail Wright was born on April 8, 1966, in Dallas, Texas, but grew up in San Diego, California. Her father was a pharmaceutical executive. Her mother sold cosmetics. By high school, she was modeling in Paris, earning her first checks at 14. But she didn't dream of fame, she dreamed of escape. Television found her first. In 1984, she landed the role of Kelly Capwell on the NBC soap Santa Barbara. Within months, she was nominated for 3 Daytime Emmys. Producers saw her as America's new blonde ingenue. But even then, Wright showed signs of the willfulness that would define her. She refused long-term contracts, argued for creative control, and walked away from roles others would have killed for. Her breakout came in 1987, when a modest fantasy film turned her into royalty. The Princess Bride wasn't expected to last, but her portrayal of Princess Buttercup made her an icon. She became the face of purity and patience, the dream girl of a generation. But off camera, she hated the label. Wright later admitted she wasn't anyone's damsel. She wanted grit, substance, power. So she waited for the right film, and it came, in the form of Forrest Gump, 1994. Jenny Curran was everything Hollywood avoided. Damaged, political, tragic. The role earned Wright her first Golden Globe nomination. Tom Hanks won the Oscar. She didn't. It was the first time the business reminded her who it rewarded and who it forgot. The next decade tested her loyalty more than her fame. She married Sean Penn, one of the most unpredictable actors of his generation, in 1996. Their marriage was passionate, public, and volatile. Through it all, Wright worked selectively. Message in a bottle, unbreakable, white oleander. Critics loved her restraint, but studios labeled her difficult. Why? Because she said no. When the marriage collapsed in 2010, the tabloids called her the woman who lost herself to a man's chaos. But in truth, she'd been reborn. Just 3 years later, Wright returned with a vengeance, as Claire Underwood in Netflix's House of Cards. The icy, immaculate strategist opposite Kevin Spacey redefined her career and, in many ways, her reputation. She became the embodiment of elegance with a knife behind her back. Her performance earned a Golden Globe and multiple Emmy nominations. Yet behind that triumph lay friction, creative, personal, and moral. The same determination that kept her standing also left scars along the way. Wright once said, "I don't get mad. I remember." And for nearly 3 decades, she remembered every slight, every betrayal, every collaborator who underestimated her. Which brings us to the question that drove this documentary. Who did Robin Wright truly resent the most? In a world obsessed with charm, she learned that grace could be armor. Robin Wright has never been Hollywood's loudest star, but she may be its most quietly defiant. Tonight, we uncover the 6 names that shaped her grudges. The colleagues, directors, and co-stars who crossed her lines of trust and respect. Was it ego? Betrayal? Or something deeper, the cost of surviving a system built to silence women who refuse to play small? Buckle up, because behind the calm exterior of Robin Wright lies a history of precision, every wound catalogued, every lesson remembered. And it all starts with one name: Sean Penn. They were Hollywood's rebel royalty. 2 Oscar nominees, both ferociously independent, both drawn to danger. Robin Wright met Sean Penn in the late 1980s after his turbulent split from Madonna. The connection was instant, electric, and complicated. They married in 1996 after years of on-again, off-again drama. For a while, they were the picture of artistic rebellion, living far from Los Angeles, raising 2 children, and refusing studio conformity. But behind closed doors, the volatility that made them magnetic also made them miserable. Wright's career slowed to a crawl. Between 1998 and 2008, she appeared in fewer than a dozen films. Industry insiders whispered that Penn wanted her home, not on set. He was the star, one biographer wrote, and Robin became the reflection. When she finally filed for divorce in 2010, after 2 separations, Penn publicly lamented her decision. He gave interviews implying she'd quit on family. Wright stayed silent, but silence didn't mean peace. Years later, she reportedly refused to attend events where Penn was present. When asked in 2014 if they were still close, she answered simply, "We have children." Professionally, she rebuilt everything he'd interrupted. House of Cards became her declaration of independence, her creative control, her Emmy nominations, her direction credits. And while Penn pursued political documentaries and new romances, Wright became the power figure Hollywood never allowed her to be. Beside him. For her, the hatred wasn't theatrical, it was practical. She'd lost a decade of her prime to a man whose storms overshadowed her discipline. That loss became lesson number 1. Never give away authorship of your own life. But as she rose again, another betrayal waited, this time from the world that finally applauded her strength. Kevin Spacey. When House of Cards premiered in February 2013, critics hailed Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright as the most dangerous duo on television. As Frank and Claire Underwood, they reinvented power couples for the streaming age, ruthless, magnetic, and morally void. But what fans didn't know was how closely the fictional dynamic mirrored reality. Reports from the set described Spacey's domineering presence. He was charming, manipulative, and fiercely protective of his screen time. Wright, ever the technician, wanted equality, both in pay and creative say. By season 3, tensions had escalated. Wright discovered she was being paid significantly less than Spacey, despite equal billing. She confronted Netflix executives, threatening to go public unless parity was achieved. Within weeks, she got it, but the victory came at a cost. Spacey reportedly viewed her demand as betrayal. Their chemistry on screen remained flawless, but off-screen, communication deteriorated. Crew members described long stretches where they'd film scenes without speaking between takes. Then came 2017. When allegations of sexual misconduct against Spacey surfaced, House of Cards imploded overnight. Production paused. Scripts were rewritten. Spacey was fired. And suddenly, Robin Wright was alone at the top, showrunner, star, and public face of a scandal not her own. She handled it with surgical precision. No public condemnations. No alliances. Just composure. But make no mistake, behind that calm, she felt betrayed. The man whose shadow she fought to escape had dragged her into another fire. In interviews afterward, she spoke with careful distance. "We were colleagues. That's where it ends." It was a line that sounded cold, until you realized it was survival. For Wright, Spacey symbolized Hollywood's oldest trap, that a woman's rise is always tethered to a man's fall. And she refused to fall with him. But as she rebuilt her image once more, Another ghost from her past would challenge her integrity all over again. David Fincher. Perfection has a price. And on the set of House of Cards, Robin Wright paid it every single day. David Fincher, the show's executive producer and pilot director, was already a legend. Fight Club, The Social Network, Gone Girl. He was known for his obsessive attention to detail, demanding dozens of takes until he found the exact emotional cadence he wanted. For most actors, Fincher's style was intimidating but tolerable. For Wright, it became a war of precision. During the first season's shoot in 2012, reports surfaced that Fincher's control tower approach left little room for improvisation. Wright, meticulous in her own right, chafed under the repetition. "He'll shoot a pen dropping 40 times," one crew member later told Vanity Fair. It wasn't ego, it was endurance. Wright understood discipline. She'd survived the volatility of Sean Penn and the ego of Spacey. But Fincher's control was different. It wasn't personal, it was architectural. And it clashed with her growing belief that she'd earned authorship over Claire Underwood. In private, she began taking notes, analyzing edits, questioning camera placement. By season 3, she asked to direct. Netflix hesitated. Fincher reportedly did too. But Wright persisted and won. Her directorial debut came in season 4. Her episode, critics noted, carried a sharper intimacy, a woman's gaze in a world of male architects. It was her quiet rebellion against Fincher's style, a statement that power didn't require permission. Though the two maintained respect publicly, insiders described their relationship as creative distance. They'd exchange compliments, then retreat into their corners. Still, Wright never denied his influence. In 2017, she said, "He taught me structure." But structure, she also learned, could be a cage. Their tension was the blueprint of her next transformation from actor to auteur. Because for Robin Wright, every clash was a class in control. But the next one would threaten the very idea of control itself. Ben Foster. He was younger, passionate, idealistic. When Robin Wright met actor Ben Foster in 2011, she was rebuilding, freshly divorced, freshly independent. Foster, nearly 15 years her junior, was known for his intensity in films like The Messenger and 3:10 to Yuma. They began quietly dating after meeting on the set of Rampart. For the first time in years, Wright seemed unguarded, even playful. The media called it Robin's second act. But behind the smiles, familiar patterns were returning. Foster admired her discipline, but also struggled with her dominance. Wright was a mother of two, an Emmy-nominated producer, a global face for Louis Vuitton. Foster was still climbing. The imbalance gnawed at them. Friends later described their relationship as two actors trying to out-endure each other. They got engaged in 2014, called it off, reconciled, then split for good in 2015. The reason? According to People, Wright cited different life rhythms. But those close to her said she'd realized something deeper. She was reliving the same emotional choreography she'd once survived with Penn. After the breakup, Wright stopped speaking about relationships publicly. She focused on work, fitness, and directing. When asked by Harper's Bazaar how she'd changed, she replied, "I'm done needing to be saved or seen." The fallout wasn't scandalous. It was quiet, controlled, and absolute. But that quiet masked exhaustion. Foster's exit reopened the wound of wasted emotional labor, the same wound Penn had carved years earlier. To Robin Wright, love had become another performance, beautiful on camera, destructive in rehearsal. And as she began retreating from romantic headlines, she redirected her energy toward a new obsession: legacy. But Hollywood doesn't let anyone rewrite their story without resistance. And soon, she'd find herself facing a subtler, colder kind of betrayal from an actress she once considered an ally. Claire Danes. Hollywood doesn't like women who age quietly. By 2010, Wright had spent nearly 3 decades in front of the camera, aging gracefully. Yes, but also watching the industry hand her archetypes to younger versions of herself. One of those successors was Claire Danes. Danes had also played a version of Juliet, also starred in prestige dramas, also carried the poise of a thinking woman on screen. When Homeland premiered in 2011, just 2 years before House of Cards, critics hailed Danes as the new face of complex female power. And for Wright, that sting was sharper than fans realized. Both actresses had worked with the same casting directors, the same agents, even the same press teams. Wright had once been offered a spy role years earlier, but declined, calling it formulaic. That show would later morph into Homeland. Watching Danes win multiple Emmys for the role she'd turned down became a quiet torment. Reports suggest Wright vented privately about the imbalance of praise, how television suddenly adored difficult women, but only once younger actresses played them. Yet she never voiced it publicly. She couldn't. Hollywood punishes envy in women, especially older ones. Instead, she funneled that frustration into House of Cards. Claire Underwood grew colder, harder, more precise, echoing Wright's internal shift from longing to legacy. In 2017, during a joint event, a reporter compared Danes's Carrie Mathison to Wright's Claire. Danes smiled. Wright didn't. She simply said, "Different worlds." But that moment, small, fleeting, revealed decades of tension about who gets celebrated and who gets replaced. For Robin Wright, Danes wasn't an enemy by action. She was an enemy by reflection. A mirror held too soon, too bright, too high. And that reflection forced Wright to confront her next opponent. Not a peer, not a lover, but an entire system that refused to forgive her perfectionism. Hollywood itself. By her late 50s, Robin Wright had outlived her stereotypes. She'd been the ingenue, the wife, the survivor, the power broker. But Hollywood never forgave her for being all four. For every hit, there was resistance. Studios passed her over for part citing low social media presence. Directors overlooked her for younger stars with fewer opinions. Her demands for equal pay were labeled aggressive. Wright once told The Guardian, "If you ask for what you're worth, you're called difficult." And that, in her mind, was the ultimate betrayal, not from one person, but from the institution that shaped and punished her in equal measure. Even as House of Cards ended in 2018, with Wright as the sole lead, Netflix reportedly considered canceling the final season altogether after Spacey's scandal. She fought to keep it alive, not for ego, but for the hundreds of crew members who depended on it. She won that battle, but the war left her weary. In interviews afterward, she spoke more like an architect than an actress discussing camera movement, light, and pacing. Acting had become the vehicle. Control was the destination. By the time she directed Land in 2021, a quiet, introspective film about isolation and renewal, critics saw it as autobiography. The woman who once defined Hollywood grace had retreated to the wilderness, both on screen and off. And when she finally named the 6 actors she resented most, the list wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming authorship. Because, for Robin Wright, the true antagonist had never been a person. It was the world that thought she'd stay quiet. That world had underestimated her before, and now, at 59, she wasn't afraid to say it out loud. Hate is an easy word, but for Robin Wright, it was never that simple. Behind every grudge was understanding earned slowly, painfully. Sean Penn, for instance, became a figure she no longer spoke of with venom. Years after their divorce, she told Esquire, "We were just kids trying to be adults." Time had softened the sting. She acknowledged his talent, even if his temperament had nearly buried hers. Kevin Spacey, too, she addressed with restraint. In 2018, when pressed about him, Wright simply said she knew only his work ethic. It sounded cold, but those words carried quiet mercy, a refusal to define herself through someone else's downfall. Even with David Fincher, the perfectionist who'd pushed her to exhaustion, she came to see the lesson beneath the friction. "He taught me rigor," she said later, and rigor saves you. And perhaps the most revealing moment came in 2021 during a panel for Land. When asked if she still held grudges, Wright smiled faintly and said, "No, I harvest them." It wasn't forgiveness, it was transformation. Because every betrayal had forged a tool: patience, precision, power. The very qualities that kept her relevant when countless others faded. Even her supposed rivalry with Claire Danes softened over time. When Wright directed episodes of Ozark and Behind the Eyes, critics drew comparisons to Danes' cerebral acting. Wright brushed them off. "Different landscapes," she said. It wasn't a dismissal, it was liberation. And then there was Hollywood itself, the system she'd once accused of betrayal. In 2022, Netflix quietly offered her a new producing deal. She accepted, not out of gratitude, but strategy. She understood that staying in the room mattered more than burning it down. Robin Wright didn't forgive because she forgot. She forgave because it was efficient. Because every second spent looking backward was a second stolen from authorship. And after 4 decades in an industry built on erasure, she'd earned the right to own every frame of her story. For nearly 40 years, Robin Wright's greatest weapon wasn't her beauty or her talent. It was her silence. When tabloids speculated about her marriages, she never replied. When journalists fished for dirt on co-stars, she smiled and redirected. And when Netflix tried to bury House of Cards under scandal, she held the line. Silence, for Wright, was not passivity. It was precision. She understood early that women who vented lost control of their narrative. But women who withheld it, they made people lean in. In interviews, she'd let the pauses do the talking. Her voice was low, deliberate, measured each sentence a small act of sovereignty. "The less they know," she once said, "the longer you last." That restraint was survival in a business obsessed with reinvention. While contemporaries gave tell-alls and memoirs, Wright stayed away from public confession. She knew Hollywood had a short memory, but a long appetite for scandal. Her choice wasn't fear, it was chess. Publicly, she appeared serene, self-contained. Privately, she curated a meticulous emotional archive. Every betrayal cataloged, every injustice remembered, every lesson logged for later use. Even her decision to name the 6 actors she hated most wasn't impulsive. It came during an unguarded conversation with a journalist she trusted. She didn't list them alphabetically, or even chronologically. She listed them by impact, the order they'd reshaped her sense of self. And she did it reportedly, with a half-smile. Because she knew the irony. The world would talk about who she hated, not what she endured. But Wright was always 3 steps ahead. Her candor, at 59, wasn't bitterness, it was narrative reclamation. For decades, others had written her story. First, as the princess, then the wife, then the politician. Now she was the narrator. And in that subtle shift from muse to author, she achieved what few actresses of her era ever did: control without collapse. When asked recently if she'd ever write a memoir, she answered, "I already have. It's on film." A lifetime of performances, each role a veiled confession, each silence a footnote to the wars she refused to fight in public. That's why the list mattered. Not because it exposed grudges, but because it proved how deeply she understood the machinery of perception. She'd weaponized composure, and that, in the end, was her revenge. Remember that interview? The one that began it all, the journalist, the quiet room, the pause before she said, "Some taught me how not to behave." When the story broke, the internet rushed to decode it. Comment sections filled with guesses, think pieces, and nostalgia for Forrest Gump and House of Cards. But Robin Wright never clarified. And that was the final twist. She didn't need to name them, publicly, because we already knew. We'd watched the story unfold for 30 years, scene by scene. The husband who clipped her wings, the co-star who stole her spotlight, the director who tried to mold her, the lover who mirrored her mistakes, the rival who reminded her of youth, the system that wanted her gone. They were all chapters in one long apprenticeship in power. And through it all, Robin Wright never broke character. She walked through betrayal with posture, through loss with grace, through rage with calculation. That was the secret. The calm wasn't natural, it was engineered. At 59, when she finally named those 6 people, it wasn't confession. It was punctuation. A full stop at the end of a sentence she'd been writing since The Princess Bride. Because hate, for her, wasn't a scar. It was an outline. Every grudge defined the borders of who she refused to become. And when she finally stepped back from the canvas, she could see it clearly. The portrait of a woman who survived Hollywood, not by playing its game, but by mastering it. She didn't win through kindness or vengeance. She won through memory. And as the lights fade, we return to that first moment, the poised woman, the silent room, the calm before the confession, a smile, a pause, and a lifetime of lessons. Finally spoken.